Everybody, it's Olivia from the Tennessee Conservative here to bring you this week's Big 7 update. We've got a lot of great stuff to get into: a real estate transfer tax bill, a Riley Gaines speaking event, the District 7 special primary, all sorts of goodies to dive into. But before we do, I just want to remind you, if you're not already, to make sure that you subscribe to our free e-newsletter. It comes into your inbox every day. All sorts of goodies in there about what is happening here in the volunteer state. So you do not want to miss out on all the news, particularly from the conservative point of view. If you're not signed up, very simple to do. You should be by the end of this video. All you have to do is text news, NEWS, to 423-205-5600. So simple, so easy. You don't want to miss out. And also make sure you're following us on all of our social media pages. If it's out there, we're on it. X, Truth, Gab, Getter, MeWe, Parler, the whole shebang. So if it's out there, we're on it. Make sure you go like and follow all of our pages out there. All right, friends, let's dive into what we got going on this week. First on our list, outside money continues to pour into District 7 congressional race ahead of the special election. The Tennessee D7 election to replace Congressman Mark Green, who resigned in July, has drawn a lot of national attention, but not just from media kind of keeping their eye on the situation because the U.S. House margin is so narrow, but also from PACs and dark money groups who are funneling money into the state to try and prop up their desired candidate. And just because the primary is over, it doesn't mean the money has stopped flowing in from either side of the political aisle. We've got a liberal super PAC based in Delaware who's using a spoiler strategy to sway the race in favor of Democrat Afton Benn, while the MAGA PAC is spending to buoy Republican Van Epps. So what's really interesting about this liberal super PAC, which is called Your Community, is they actually conducted some internal polling, which showed that Benn is only trailing Van Epps by about 8%. Which they put well within the margin of error if voter turnout mirrors other recent special elections. They also noted that 83% of Tennessee Democrats are extremely motivated to vote, while only 71% of Republicans fell into that same category. So they have some interesting ideas that they're capitalizing on. Now, their strategy to overcome that split is to prop up independent candidate John Thorpe by highlighting him as a more conservative independent candidate than Van Epps, which they ultimately think could help pull as much as 9% of the vote from Van Epps, which would be just enough for Bain to squeak into victory. Your Community acted on that proposed strategy very quickly. They sent a mailer which compared Van Epps to John Thorpe, calling Thorpe a conservative independent and Van Epps a hedge fund billionaire-backed rhino. Now, they also created a TV ad which echoed the same message, called him like a hedge fund puppet, all those sorts of things. So they are clearly capitalizing on this strategy of potentially dividing the voter base and capitalizing on an energized base comparatively to Republicans. Now, what's also interesting about this is how invested the Democrats are. I have a show and tell for you today. I got this fun little letter from the Voter Participation Center. I don't know if you can see that, but it talks about how my records have showed that I haven't yet voted. I believe in voting on election day personally, and that compared to other voters in my state, my voting record is above average. Good for me. Now, what's very interesting is while this comes off as a nonpartisan group, they're just trying to convince you to go out and vote in the special election. I went ahead and looked up the Voter Participation Center, and their CEO and president, get this, was the National Finance Director at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, which is the Democrat Hill Committee for the U.S. Senate. So very interesting how much Democrat money is flowing into a seat that has typically been considered very safe red. So there's a lot of speculation going around about, is there enough to flip the seat, or are the Democrats just mostly excited about closing a margin which could help them build momentum in 2026 and onward. So it'll be very interesting to continue to watch that race. Almost every Republican politician in Tennessee is backing Van Epps, urging people to get out and vote. Obviously the same for Bain. But the Democratic National Committee chairman was in Tennessee campaigning for Ben. They've got a lot of boots on the ground. So there is a lot of eyes on this special primary. President Trump has even gotten involved, seeing it as important enough. He hosted a tele-rally with Van Epps a few days ago. It's put Tennessee kind of in a battleground state position. So it'll be very interesting to see how that continues to come along as we approach December 2nd. Very big one to watch. All right, next on the docket. East Tennessee mayor takes leadership role in bringing real estate transfer tax revenue back to county governments. Now, we always like a bill that's going to put money back in a more local use than just giving it to the state to spend at their discretion, right? That's always a good thing. So, proposed legislation in the upcoming Tennessee General Assembly legislative session could return more than $141 million of revenue to local governments. How are we going to do that? Now, Jefferson County Mayor Park Potts is taking the lead in getting other county mayors in Tennessee to get on the bandwagon to support the legislation, sending a letter to the governor and the state funding board requesting that funding for the legislation be included in the governor's budget proposal. The governor just hosted his budget hearings for the year. He heard from all of the departments who made their asks, their requests, their needs, etc. And then he will prepare that budget and present it to the legislature so they can make amendments and sign off of it and do all of that. But that'll be later in the session. So, sponsoring this bill is Senator Jack Johnson in the Senate and Representative Pat Marsh in the House, SB 1080 and HB 649, which would return 50% of the proceeds of the real estate transfer tax to county governments for road repairs, debt service, capital improvements, and other non-reoccurring expenses. So basically to say, hey, why are we sending this revenue to the state who maybe graciously will give us back a portion if we ask for certain projects, this or that, versus saying, why don't we just keep that revenue or half of that revenue so that we can do what we need to do in our communities? Again, fixing the roads. Hello, I think all of us can get on board with that. In Jefferson County, for instance, the success of the legislation could mean an additional $940,000 in revenue to the county coffers. That's significant. Think how much a local entity could do with almost $1 million versus the state, and how much less red tape there might potentially have to go through in order to get some of those projects completed, right? The money should stay and serve the county and the community from which it came. They're the ones who theoretically know how to use it best and know where it needs to go the fastest. Again, theoretically. According to the bill's Senate sponsor, again, that would be Jack Johnson, prior to 2007, 50% of proceeds from the tax were provided to county governments where the tax is collected when real estate is transferred. Hopefully, Johnson said the bill would aim to bring those funds back to the local county governments where they belong. Pretty straightforward, I think. Hopefully, we'll see some support on that moving through the House. Again, never a bad thing to take large chunks of money out of state discretionary and give them back to the counties that they know how to serve, that they need to serve. All right, popping right along here. Tennessee GOP State Executive Committee member petitions General Assembly to close the primaries. This is such a big issue for conservatives and grassroots. It's huge. It's so important. There's very few issues, I think, that are as important or more important to the conservative and grassroots base than closing the stinking primaries. Now, there have been a lot of efforts on this. It's been shut down completely, but this SEC member has written another letter to beseech the legislature to take action. In a recent letter to the Senate State and Local Government Committee, SEC member Terry Nicholson, who represents District 17, beseeched lawmakers to take up legislation aimed at closing the primary elections, citing numerous requests for transparency and integrity in Tennessee elections from constituents and the GOP State Executive Committee, which it's really, I think, a big deal when the SEC actually gets vocal about an issue because they don't do that very often. So for the committee to continuously be pushing for that kind of legislation tells you how big of an issue this is statewide for Republican voters in general. It's a big deal. Tennessee is poised to experience rapid population growth, particularly from states such as New York. We're closed. Tell them we thank you though. Where most voters traditionally support Democrat candidates. This reality makes protecting the integrity of our local elections more critical than ever. Failing to enact party registration undermines the hard work so many of us have invested in electing conservative leadership at the local level, she wrote. Very true. I don't think that's such a great way to sum it up. She even offered her assistance in helping to draft any kind of legislation on the matter. So that's really awesome. She's being really proactive about this. Now, again, this is such a critical issue. In 2022, the Tennessee Conservative, we actually conducted a poll and 98% of our respondents said that primaries should be closed. Almost that same amount said that GOP leadership, the governor, Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor, need to be more proactive about bringing that legislation forward and pushing it through, and making sure that the GOP state chair, Scott Golden, is being vocal about it as well. So this is a hugely supported issue. I doubt those numbers have changed any, if at all. But those cries keep falling on deaf ears. Between 2023 and present, 4 bills have been killed on the subject, never made it out of committee or were placed behind the budget or just didn't even get a second. In the case of the bill last year that was presented, not a single member of the Senate State and Local Government Committee would even second the bill, meaning it just never got heard. So there's a real issue. Now we say, I wonder why. What's in it for these people to keep the primaries open? Well, a lot of these lawmakers rely on these Democrat crossover votes to keep them in office. We actually have a story about that. You can read it on the website, where an elected official, a state representative, basically was caught on tape saying, closed primaries were the worst thing. That would totally screw us. I can rely on some Democrats to keep me in office. That's how they can keep the conservative grassroots movement squashed. So it continues to be an issue. I think there is a chance that the legislation will be revived in 2026. At least that's what the bill sponsor said at the time. So we will keep our eyes on that and obviously continue to rally behind that bill, because it is super important to get our primaries closed, because otherwise what's the point, right? Kind of hard to say that we are the number one safest, securest elections in the country when we don't even have closed primaries, right? So hopefully we will see some good movement on that coming down the pipe in January. So get ready to be calling and emailing and contacting your representatives to push this through this year. Let's let 2026 be the years we close the primary. Okie dokie. Williamson County teacher suspended for Charlie Kirk remarks reinstated. Obviously, we've been tracking a lot of educators being suspended or fired or terminated, et cetera, over social media remarks about Charlie Kirk. Now, one of these teachers was a Williamson County elementary school teacher, I believe, science teacher, who was suspended, or high school, suspended from her position over comments she made. And then the school investigated whether or not she needed to be fired, right? So Emily Orbison, yes, teacher at Franklin High School, she actually landed in the national spotlight because her Instagram posts saying, oh, well, too bad there wasn't a good guy with a gun there, or, well, don't mourn his death. It's just the price of doing business. These are things that she's posted on Instagram, caught the attention of the Federalist, which is a huge national pundit. So they kind of shown us a huge spotlight on her, which obviously did not make her happy, and the school put her on suspension soon after that. In retaliation, she filed a federal lawsuit against the district, claiming that her First Amendment rights were being trampled and they couldn't keep her off of school grounds, and she demanded to be reinstated and all that fun stuff. So the school, after their internal investigation, now they didn't say anything until the lawsuit was brought, but after the federal lawsuit has been brought and is gaining momentum, the school did decide to reinstate her, saying that her actions did not violate the school code of conduct, this, that. So they offered to reinstate her and give her back pay. Now, Orbison did not accept this. She resigned just a couple days after officially being reinstated and is continuing to pursue her federal lawsuit. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that shakes out, because the district maintains that they had every right to put her on suspension pending an investigation, which is totally true. They weren't trying to stifle her speech or say you couldn't have said that, but we're looking into the fact of, did what you say cause a disruption per the bylaws or violate the code of conduct, et cetera, et cetera. So to claim that they didn't have the right to suspend her, we'll see how well that plays in court, because as of now, she is continuing in that federal suit. So this will be very interesting, and this will definitely set the precedent, I believe, for the other cases where educators are suing their districts or their colleges. There's several of those happening. So this one seems to be moving right now. The other ones we don't really have any updates on them, but it'll be interesting to see how it continues to shake out as these cases do or don't progress. So kind of interesting. We'll see which schools actually really hold to the idea that it's not acceptable to promote a culture of assassination, and which ones will fold under political pressure, the same way they folded probably from political pressure to fire them in the first place. So we'll really see where the lines are drawn, and I think it'll give a really good idea of where our education system, both K through 12 and higher education, really stands on the issue, right? It'll be interesting.
Guys, we're about to head into our annual campaign, but for those of you that could help us out early, we would really appreciate it because we desperately need it. We're always just bumping along the bottom here. Wish there was any money in state and local conservative media, but if it's out there, I haven't found it yet. So please do go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com/support. Conservatives always say, well, why aren't there more conservative media outlets? It's because there are tons of people that listen to this broadcast and read our publication that have never lifted a finger to help us financially. And it's because we talk the talk and we run our mouths and we put our bumper stickers on our cars, but we don't often actually give. And the corporations and the Democrats do. So please do go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com/support. If you get $50 or more, or a recurring donation of $10 or more, we will send you a Proud Tennessee Conservative tumbler, a koozie, a list of your elected officials in the legislature, and our heartfelt thanks, which frankly is worth more than gold. Or you can send your checks to P.O. Box 625, Signal Mountain, Tennessee 37377. And I've about quit checking that thing here lately, so if y'all can help us out, that would be awesome.
All right, my friends, moving right along. Rutherford County Library is conducting inventory in order to comply with state age-appropriate laws. So the Rutherford County Library System basically said, hey, we're going to close down for a week and inventory our collection to make sure that we are completely in compliance with the age protection, age-appropriate mandates, all of that stuff. So hundreds of children's and juvenile books are being evaluated, which is great. I wish every library system would do this. Tennessee Secretary of State Trey Hargett sent a letter to all 181 libraries in the state's regional library system in early September, which followed President Donald Trump's executive order, which was the one about defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and biological truth, all that good stuff. So it was intended to bring common sense back into public institutions, which receive federal funds, and that includes libraries. So there's quite a bit of grant money, federal grant money, that's funneled through into the libraries here. So they have every right to say, hey, you must comply with these federal standards in order to receive your standing or your grant money. So Hargett's letter aims to bring Tennessee's libraries into compliance, which again, all receive federal funding through the grant program. So they have to comply with these age-appropriate rules. Now, Rutherford's been very interesting because they have been really championing this. The library chair there has been very conservative, very active, trying to get things pushed and accomplished and doing all this stuff. So it's great to see them taking a really concrete step. They've, of course, gotten a lot of pushback, but to just close and say, hey, we're going to kind of start from scratch and do everything, that's a really huge positive step. So a couple of other libraries have closed for like a day or two or done things here and there. But I think this is a really great positive step forward, that they're taking decisive action and saying, let's just start from scratch and kind of rebuild the foundation, which is exactly what needs to be done. So that's great. Williamson stated their office has received numerous complaints about books in public libraries for several years. This has been ongoing. There's just no question. We see video after video, testimony, all of those things about what is going down in these libraries, what is available for children to just walk in and take off the shelf that would most adults, I think, would blush at reading. So huge positive step. Way to go, Rutherford County libraries. Keep it up. We look forward to you setting an example for the rest of the state. Okay, friends, Tennessee House and Senate speakers disagree with the Trump pardons concerning Quesada and Cade Cothran. I think not a surprise that they would disagree. I think a lot of people were not happy about the pardon situation here, but our GOP leadership is taking a decisive stance on this. Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, who is also the Senate Speaker, said if he had been advising the president, he would have told him not to issue the pardons. And yeah, because again, being pardoned for embezzling taxpayer funds, there's a lot of questions. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, which is just very questionable on all sides. So I think that's a solid thing to say. If I were advising him, I would have advised him not to do it. Cameron Sexton in the House said the pair should not have been pardoned after being found guilty on multiple charges. He also said that the FBI started investigating Quesada and Cothran during Trump's first administration, and then the Justice Department decided to go to trial this spring after Trump's second term began. So a lot of people were saying, well, the whole trial and this and that was, under the Biden DOJ, so it was, rebuttal prosecute, or not rebuttal, retribution, retaliatory prosecution, those sorts of things. But again, this all began under Trump's first administration. And that doesn't mean that, everything was squeaky clean in the DOJ, but it's perhaps not as clear cut as people might say. U.S. District Court Judge Eli Richardson, who was a former FBI agent and assistant U.S. attorney. And I will also mention and make note that he was also the attorney in charge of the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case while he was in Tennessee. So, okay, some stuff going on there. He adjudicated the case and sentenced Quesada to 36 months in prison, ordered him to pay $30,000 fine for his role in the kickback scheme. Richardson also sentenced Cothran to 30 months and ordered him to pay $25,000 fine. And then both were granted a presidential pardon last week, I think kind of surprisingly, kind of very shocking to a lot of people. So interesting. Now, their third co-conspirator, Robin Smith, who also pled guilty and then took a deal to testify against the other two, she was sentenced to 8 months, but has not been pardoned. She also had to pay back a large fine, but she likely will not receive a presidential pardon and will serve out those 8 months. So it's just very interesting. A lot of stuff going on. People are talking about, our elected officials, they shouldn't have been pardoned, or should they have not been charged so greatly or sentenced so heavily? Are elected officials more accountable than other people? Should they be held to a higher standard, right? Lots of questions about this. But overall, I think the pardons were kind of a shock to everyone. There's definitely more going on here than meets the eye. So very interesting. And finally, my friends, the first official Turning Point USA event at University of Tennessee, Chattanooga features Riley Gaines as their keynote speaker. So this was really great to see this chapter get launched. They had been fighting. Turning Point had been wanting to start a chapter at UTC for a while, but was initially turned down by the student government. So that's super disappointing that they didn't even want Turning Point's presence on campus. They said they wouldn't feel safe. They said, we don't like the hateful rhetoric, blah, blah, blah. The student government was overturned by the dean of the student's office, which did not go over well, of course, with the student government and other liberal students on campus, but said no, they have every right to be here. So long fought battle for them. Very exciting to see them. And as their kind of christening event to officially kick off the chapter, they had women's rights advocate Riley Gaines speak on the mission we carry forward. So just talking about faith and courage and what it means to take Charlie Kirk's mission and legacy into the future. According to event organizers, the crowd of over 250 attendees filled the venue in under 10 minutes, and more than 200 people had to be turned away as the space reached maximum capacity. So according to the chapter president there, they were super excited about the momentum, super thrilled that Riley came to join them, and they said we are so excited to get this started and get people ignited on our campus. So hopefully big things coming out of that chapter. Super proud, super exciting, and we can't wait to see the spark that lights that continues to grow the Turning Point presence here in Tennessee. Okay, friends, you did it. You made it all the way to the end. You've got all the biggest happenings in Tennessee this week. Thanks so much for hanging in there with us. Remember to subscribe to that e-newsletter, all of our social medias, and if you have it in your hearts to give us a financial donation, we always appreciate that. It doesn't happen without your support, and we know what it takes, and we appreciate that sacrifice. So anything you're willing to give, we are just super grateful for all of your support. And we look forward to seeing you Monday when we pop into your inbox with our next newsletter. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing weekend.